Good morning or afternoon or whenever you're watching this. Your first ELD today, you are going to learn the first lesson of chapter 6, which is the slope of a line. So, finding the slope of a line. The slope of a non-vertical line is the number of units the line rises or falls for each unit of horizontal change from left to right. So one thing to point out is the variable we're going to use for slope is m. So from here on out, every time we use the lowercase letter m, we are referring to slope. And this is the definition of slope. It's the vertical change over horizontal change, or in other words, saying rise over run. And something to think about is rise means this is the change in our y's, and run is the change in your x's. And so every time you are finding slope, your answer is going to be a number over a number because it represents rise over run. Okay, so if I asked you to find the slope of a graphed line, then what you're going to do is you're going to find 2 points on your line, which in this case, these 2 points right here are the points that are already labeled for us. And you can just count your rise, and then you're going to count your run. So it doesn't matter which point you start at. Let's say I started down at this point. Then I would go up 2. So my rise would be 2. And then I go over to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until I get to that second point. So the slope of this line would be 2/5. And that would be our slope. Now, let's say I started at this point right here. If I did this point, then I would have to go down first. So that's down 2. When you go down, that's a negative value. So -2. And then I would run. So horizontal, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And notice I'm going to the left. And so that is, when you go left, it's also a negative value. And then recall, negative over a negative on a fraction is a positive. So again, my slope is 2/5. So it does not matter which point you start at, your slope will be the same. So on this example over here, let's start at this point right here. You always go up or down first. So you would go down 1, 2, 3. So down means I go -3. So think down here, down is negative. And then my run, which is to the right, would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if my fraction cannot be simplified, then that would be the slope, that would be the slope of my line. So my first line, the slope was positive, and just kind of pay attention here to what this line looked like. So positive, you always look at lines from left to right. That's a positive slope. And then over here, if I go from left to right, this showed me the slope as a negative slope. Okay, and so what you'll notice is when you're classifying slopes, the answers can be for slope. They can be positive, they can be negative, they can be 0, and they can be undefined. So on this first one, this is like that very first one we did. This line, we would say, is going uphill. And if it's going uphill, that's a positive slope. If your line is going downhill, that would be a negative slope. So downhill, and you're always looking at your lines from left to right. Okay, so uphill is positive, downhill your slope needs to be negative. If your line is horizontal, a horizontal line, your slope is 0. And so you can either write the word 0, or what we just do is say, okay, what's the slope of that line? We just put a 0 there. If your line is vertical, straight up and down, then you would say your slope is undefined. You don't say no slope. You're going to say undefined if we ask you the slope of that line. And so something to think about is all of these lines, whether your line is going uphill, like here, or your line is going downhill, or if your line is a horizontal line, you could ride your bike on all 3 of those options. You can ride your bike uphill, downhill, and you can ride it on flat ground. What you can't do is you can't ride your bike straight up a wall, okay? Gravity is not going to allow that. So that's the one to think about, that one is not possible. That's why that slope is undefined, and maybe that can help you remember that your slope is undefined for a vertical line. Okay, the first example, we're just going to find the slope of each line, and we're going to actually find what that number of the slope is. So we're going to start with line A, and again, you can start at whichever point you want. I'm going to start at this point, and you always go up or down first. So I would go up, 1, 2, 3. So I would write 3 on top because that was my rise, and then I would go over to the right, 1. And so the slope of line A would be 3. Okay, let's look at line B. Line B, I have my 2 points. I'm going to just start at this point right here. I always go up or down first. So in this case, to get to that point, I'm going to have to go down first. So I would go down, 1, 2, 3. And remember, when you go down, that's a negative. And then I would go over to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And to the right is positive. So the slope of this line, -3/7. Line C, that's a vertical line. I cannot ride my bike up that line. So that slope is undefined. And that's what you're going to write as the slope of the line, undefined. Okay, line D. Here's line D. I'm going to pick this point here. And you always go up or down first. So I have to go up to get to that point right there. So I'm going to go up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Up, 5 is a +5. And then I would go over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I went to the right, 5. So that's a +5. And again, my line is going uphill, so my slope should be positive if I'm doing it right. You always want to simplify if you can. 5/5 would simplify to a slope of 1. Okay, line E. I'm going to start at this point right here, and to get to this point down here, I'm going to have to go down first. So down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and down means -6, and then I would run or go over to the right, 1. And so -6/1 simplifies to just -6. And again, if you look at line E from left to right, it's going downhill, so it should be a negative slope. Line F, remember this is a horizontal line here. Flat line means the slope is 0 because it doesn't rise at all. And so if it doesn't rise, it's a slope of 0. And then lastly, line G. So I'm going to start at this point right here. And I would have to go up, 1, 2. So that's 2 on top. And then I would run, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And again, I went up, so that's positive, and I went to the right, so that's positive. And if you notice, our line is going uphill, so that should be a positive slope. And I can't reduce that, so my slope stays 2/9. Now we're going to look at how could you find the slope of a line if you just knew the points. So if you just knew the ordered pairs, instead of seeing it on a graph, you're going to use this formula. So again, hopefully this formula is one that you can memorize, because if you memorize what the slope definition is, the slope definition is rise, which means change in y, over run, which is your change in x. Okay? So to find the slope, you're going to subtract your y values and subtract your x values. Okay, so here are 2 points. And if it helps you, you can label your points x1 and y1, and then x2 and y2. So to find the slope, we're going to write what slope is. The variable for slope is m. And we're going to subtract our y's. And it doesn't matter which one you start with. So let's just say we start over here and we do 7 minus 5 over. All that matters is if you started over here on this point, then when you do your x's, you have to start with that x value as well. So I have to do 4 minus 2. So whichever point you're going to start in, you have to make sure that that x value then goes first if that y value went first. And then we're going to simplify. 7 minus 5 is 2, and 4 minus 2 is 2. And then we're going to reduce that, and the slope of that line between those points would be 1. Okay, part B, we're going to find the slope. So we're going to do m equals, And I'm going to start and I'm going to subtract my y's. So I'm going to just draw an arrow. So I'm doing -2 minus 4 over, and since I started with -2, I have to start with this x value on the bottom, 3 minus -1. So make sure you pay attention to that. 3 minus -1. So that becomes, and on your notes, I want you to write it, 3 minus negative, and then underneath it, you can turn that into a plus sign. So remember, slope formula is always a subtraction symbol. So I would get -2 minus 4 would be -6 over 3 plus 1 would be 4. And then I can reduce that fraction by 2. So the slope of that line would be -3 over 2. Always reduce your fractions if you can. All right, part C, doing the same thing. So to find the slope, I'm going to subtract the y values. So I'm going to start over here. So I'm going to do -5 minus -5 over, and then I have to start with this x value because I started in this point. So I'm doing 6 minus 8. Then when you subtract a negative, that becomes a positive. So -5 plus 5 is a 0 over -2. And if you're not sure what this reduces to, you can check this on your calculator. On your calculator, if you do 0 divided by -2, you're going to get out 0. So 0 divided by anything is 0. So the slope of that line would be 0. So if you recall, if you graphed those points, that line would be a horizontal line. Okay, last one. Slope. So I'm going to subtract my y value. So I'm going to do -9 minus -1 over, and then I have to start with this x value here, 7 minus my other x value is 7. So again, here, minus a negative becomes a plus. So -9 plus 1 is -8. 7 minus 7 is 0. Now, if you did this one on your calculator, if you did -8 divided by 0, you would get an error, which means I can't ride my bike on that line, which means undefined. You cannot divide by 0. That's an undefined slope. So if you graphed those points, your line would be, whoa, that's not how you spell that. Whoops. Your line would be a vertical line for an undefined slope. Okay, so that's how you find the slope between 2 points. Okay, that concludes your first lesson of your DLD. Your homework actually will not be passed out to you. Your homework is on this module for you to see, and make sure that you follow all the instructions of what you're supposed to do. Have a great day.